a really big part of how I kind of connected with my students. I learned about this from, there were two researchers, Nordoff and Robbins, and they did a lot with improvisation with students with disabilities. And when I heard this, when I was an undergraduate, it like totally changed how I thought about teaching music, not just to students with disabilities, but to anyone. And so I'm going to let you hear a recording. This is a student named Edward that would come in for music therapy every week, and he would sit down at the piano, and the music therapist would improvise, and he would kind of join in. Well, at first, he wasn't really happy to be there. You could tell like he was not happy at all. But slowly, you can hear like a change over the progression of when he was coming in for music therapy. So here's the first recording of Edward. We'll just listen. What do you notice about the way the person improvising at the piano communicated with the person that, Edward, that was there in music therapy?
Lighter and heavier sounds and stuff.
Yeah.
And almost like when he would play lighter, he'd calm down a little bit more, and then he'd start like talking harder. It'd be like really
Yeah.
hard crying and screaming.
Yeah. Now this is a difficult question. Do you think that him playing loud caused him to scream louder, or do you think he reacted to his screaming?
I thought he was stimulating the music.
I think so too.
So he did a lot of
Yeah, and I think maybe a little bit even of both. Like I think he was, because he was being so sensitive to what was going on with his crying, I think his crying kind of changed to not only being crying, but like communicating too, right? Did you notice like the space? He would leave space. Bum, 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 ah! Bum, 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 ah! Almost like a really gorgeous symphony, right? Like that you would hear, and it would work just the same way, right? Okay, let's listen to the second session here with Edward.
Good morning.
Cool, right? Do you notice how he kind of used his, even when he could only say ah, he used ah, right? So Edward was nonverbal, didn't speak, right? Okay, this is the next music therapy session. This is powerful stuff.
How are you? How are you? How are you? How are you? Hi. Hi.
Whoa! Pretty cool, right? Whoa! What we do is so powerful. So we can communicate with students in ways that no one else can, right? And it takes a lot to be able to sit down on the piano and be able to do that, right? But you can, right? You can learn to do that. And it doesn't have to be with the piano. It could be with your principal instrument, your flute, your guitar, whatever you play. And you can have this powerful conversation back and forth through improvisation. And maybe your student, all they do that day is cry or scream, but you can scream back and have a conversation. You can scream through your guitar, you can scream, ah, while you're singing. There's not really, you're allowed to kind of break the rules a little bit with all students, but especially with your students with disabilities, because maybe that's the only way that you can really reach them that day.
There's like a kid I went to this one briefly on, he was autistic, it's kind of scary, or most people were scared of him.
Yeah.
He was a big kid, he was really violent, for whatever reasons or whatever, but he could really scream, and he got right in my face one time, and said some not nice words. He screamed right in my face, and everybody else didn't want to deal with him, and they were just like this, kind of waiting for him to punch me, and I said, "You ever sang in a rock band?" He was like, because he kept screaming and swearing at me, and he was like, "No, I never really thought of that." And I'm like, "You ever listen to Sabbath?" He was just like, "You mean like Ozzy?" I'm like, "Yeah, you should check that out sometime." And then he screamed again in my face. I'm like, "No, seriously, you have good lungs. You should try it out." He was like, "Yeah, I never really thought of that." I'm like, "You got good hands for bass too."
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But you changed your response, right? Because the typical response would be, to scream back or to get really flustered and tense, and then that puts the other person on edge more. But when you ever sing in a rock band? It's kind of cool, It's a different response. So yeah, change the way you think about things, do things a little bit differently and experiment. Some days, like I would come in and teach my self-contained classes, I would get kicked, I would get bitten, and it was not fun. But some days you'd have something really powerful happen, and it made every other day worth it. So pretty cool. What questions do you have about students with autism in particular?
You're doing a class where they aren't able to separate them out anymore.
Right.
There's one student versus out of the family trying to incorporate everyone.
Yeah,
Right? How do you accomplish that?
that's a good question.
I've been seeing a lot of teaching these students sometimes.
Yeah. One thing you can do is give that person a buddy, but you got to be careful and not burn the buddy out, because a lot of times, a student like you would get used because you're sweet and kind and and caring, and you'd be supportive for that person. But maybe you go to every class and you're always the student that's with Jake that day, and you kind of get tired of being the student that's always with Jake. So it's got to be beneficial for both parties, right? But that works well. So maybe you have a couple of students that work well with a particular student, and then kind of buddy that person up. Also, it really just takes a lot of planning beforehand, so really finding out everything you can about that student. So calling home for good things first at the beginning of the semester. Oh, I met your son, he's really cool, I really enjoy having him in my class. And so that way, your first contact is something positive, and you can ask for more information. So like, what can I do to help him, you know? Is there anything I need to know in particular? If there's a situation in class and where there's a behavior problem, how can I help like diffuse the situation? What helps him? So anytime you ask questions that are more, how can I help, instead of your son's a problem or your daughter's a problem, that's always good.